I feel like I'm talking really fast and I apologize. This stuff is not easy to talk about. And even though it's 4 years old and it may not seem like a very big deal to other people, it was very traumatizing to all of us that experienced it. And since we haven't gotten the opportunity to talk about it or really kind of get out any of these feelings about it, it causes a ton of anxiety and it brings all that trauma back for us. And I didn't even get to the bad parts of the story yet. So, one that I started to touch on, which I'll get into more specifics later on, because of course I have receipts for all of the things. I'm a Virgo. We don't roll without receipts. Two, we talked a little bit about the mismanagement of money. We'll get into that more. Three, the incredibly hostile and shitty work environment that we worked in. So despite the fact that it was an LGBTQ agency, we dealt with tons of misogyny, a sadistic executive director who literally tortured us for fun, and that is not an exaggeration. I'll get into those stories as well. Major racism. This was a mostly white agency. It had been born on Stonewall, but not Stonewall as in Marsha P. Johnson, as in Stonewall as the more wealthier white folks that had the economic mobility to be able to move up north and upstate and started this agency. And so that's who it programmed for and what it's designed for, and really only dealt with until I got there, pretty much. Trans folks were not prioritized either. Kaden, who was one of our staff, also did a beautiful job with changing that. Rowan, who was a part of the staff, whose position I actually ended up taking when I came in, did a beautiful job with trying to break some of those barriers. But when it came to the racism part, that was pretty much on my back and on my shoulders. I got hired as the communications director, but quickly got moved to the director of operations and public relations. And so every single incidence of racism that happened ended up becoming on my shoulders because our executive director didn't know how to handle it and didn't want to. And so every time one of the patrons, the clients, the customers that would come in to be a part of the LGBTQ center said the N-word, I had to go out there and deal with them. Anytime one of our staff, because I worked really hard to diversify our staff to make sure there were people of color there so that the agency was more representative of the community. Every time there was an incidence of racism there, which there were plenty, I will also get into those in later videos, I was the person. And to say, like, that was how I earned my chops to do this DEI thing, because I dealt with it every single day. Incredibly racist, transphobic situations that I had to independently handle because the executive director didn't want to anger any of the wealthy patrons, and so it fell on me to be the bad guy. And then I kind of got painted as the angry black woman because I kept having to correct these incidences from happening to protect my staff and also to try to make it a safer space for people of color that came into the building. So there had been all kinds of things that happened. I'll get into those more specifically as we go along too. But none of them were like huge. Like, I had gone to Luis Burgos on the board. One of my coworkers had gone to Sadie Fisher, who was on the board. And I want to say another board member also, to talk about how incredibly poorly we were being treated and the things that we were going through. That fell on deaf ears. Luis ended up actually doing a radio interview with me and Evan Dawson, which I will put somewhere, a link to, where he admits that I came to him and they did nothing. So what I had actually did was I had stopped taking vacation time altogether. I had like a million vacation days because I didn't feel like I couldn't be there. I had to be in the building to protect my staff from the people that came into the center as well as from our executive director. So I was there all the time, sun up to sundown. I was there from 8:30 in the morning to 8:30, 9 o'clock and then at night every single day. So I could be the barrier between my staff and our boss and the community because they had been experienced so much. But none of the things were a big enough smoking gun to be able to be like, okay, go to the board, because we weren't allowed. We were explicitly told we were not to have contact with the board except if we're going to do an official whistleblower complaint. And there was one specific person, Dana Weiss, that was the person that we could bring those complaints to, and that was it. We weren't supposed to have contact with them outside of that. Some of them were my friends before they got on the board, and so I had a little bit more leeway, but for the most part we couldn't talk to them. So we needed something big to be able to take to them in order to really say this is enough.